Hello, hello, beautiful people. There we go.
What is going on, everybody?
Just waiting for all of y'all to come in.
Hello, hello. Drop where you're coming in from, too.
Absolutely. Hi, hello, and welcome to one more session of Smartlead's Office Hours. My name is Akash, your customer success manager here at Smartlead. For those of y'all who've been here, for those who are new, we always want to start the session with the audience. So drop on the comments, the center bottom, you'll see a chat icon. Click on that. Drop on the comments where you're from, the temperature in your city, and also let us know if you're an agency, a freelancer, or a SaaS company. We always love to know who our audiences are, and I'm always grateful for you all taking the time for this. There we go. We got a bunch of comments already. Love it. Frankfurt, Orlando,
Well,
Lahore,
let me know he's
Pakistan.
from Pakistan, but it's to me specifically. No one else read that. What's up, man?
Himachal,
There's a bunch of dope people in Pakistan, honestly. Pakistan's one of the hottest GTM spots right now. It's super
yeah?
cool.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Nice.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh, dude. So yeah, there's a bunch of really, really good people.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah, it's a potent little population of folks.
Love it.
Manila.
Keep it coming, guys. Keep it coming. Thanks
I
for
think Manila, who's doing it? What's their name? Oh, why am I spacing on it? But there's an event in Manila coming up. I wanted to shout it out, but I'm blanking on their name. So never
yeah.
mind.
Wow. Awesome.
Yeah, more Pakistan. Yep, yep, yep. Bunch of you guys.
Love
Love
it.
it.
Keep it coming, ladies and gentlemen. The real reason why we're here, the topic of today's session, outbound breaks when your message doesn't fit your market. In a noisy inbox, great personalization won't save you if you're targeting the wrong audience or saying the wrong thing. So, in this session, Kellen is going to show us how to fix that. He's going to break down how to craft creative, insight driven segments that make your messages feel handcrafted, even when they're automated. And for those of y'all who don't know Kellen, Kellen is back again. He's back with Smartlead Office Hours. Kellen Casebeer is the founder of the Deal Lab and the GTM Café, two platforms helping go to market teams master outbound and achieve true message market fit. He also leads GTM Cafe as a free practitioner led community where top GTM minds share tactical frameworks shaping modern outbound strategy. It's super interesting. We were just talking about this before you all came in, and you all should check it out. Kellen, over to you, sir. A quick round of introduction, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much. What is going on, everybody? So first of all, as I'm talking, if you guys have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. The way I'm going to do this today is I'm going to talk a little bit through sort of like a story of sort of my background and this framing on sort of message market fit. And then we're going to get into some like tactical stuff. Okay, so what's it like being the goat of Cali? I don't know, man. There's a lot of goats in Cali, so we'll have to talk about that one. But anyways, so first background, just a sec. Okay, so my background starts actually as a salesperson, right? And so I always tell people I was an SDR, I was an AE, I was a head of sales, right? And so early on, I sort of was handed playbooks, and it's like, hey, go use this, go, just copy paste the playbook, and that's going to be your path to success, right? And what I found out as I joined earlier stage companies was like that wasn't going to cut it, and I was going to have to build my own, right? And so as a head of sales, we didn't have a product yet. I had to go figure out what is my market, how can I speak to them in a way that's going to resonate. And so the way that I did that was I basically built a framework, market, segment, persona, and then angle as a way of breaking down the market. With the framing being, I needed to be more granular, to be more specific in my messaging, right? I was going to be doing one-to-many campaigns. I've done lots of one-to-one sort of like personalization, right? And when I was doing one-to-one personalization, sorry, I'm like a little bit scattered here. Basically, doing one-to-one personalization, the thing that's convenient about it is I can like look at a cache, I can look at his entire background, and I can basically go like of anything that I could ever say, what is going to be compelling to him? That's easier because there's like infinity things I can say, but it's inconvenient because I can only say it to him, right? Other side of the spectrum is one message to the entirety of everyone that you could ever speak to, right? And so that would be convenient because there's only one thing you have to say, but it's probably not going to really resonate, right? So in the spectrum, the idea that I started to pull on was where along the spectrum can I least divide the market that will still feel very meaningfully personalized to people, right? And so the framework that I came up with to index the sort of market was market, segment, persona, angle, right? The thinking here is market level would be what the average person thinks they're reaching out to when they're dividing their own market, right? And so if you go to the average SDR or honestly the average founder and you're like, hey, who do you work for? They're gonna be like, oh yeah, like Series A finance teams, something like that, right? Or they're gonna be like, trucking companies, tire shops, right? Like parts wholesalers, something like that, right? And so people very easily can sort of recall this very high level, like this is who we serve, right? And in general, it's probably true that they can buy to those people. But if you were to craft messaging going like, hey, Akash, you're a CSM in tech, blah, 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 you're not like, oh my God, this is me, man. It,
Right.
it just feels super generalized, right? And so people sort of brush it off. So the idea is that's the pattern, right? We talk about this idea of pattern interrupt, right? Like I learned that from Josh Braun. That's who I kind of credit that for. But it's like, so what's the pattern? The pattern is this like very high level way of thinking of things that's technically true but isn't compelling,
Right.
right? So we wanted to go one layer deeper, market segment, right? So the way we think of segmentation is a way of dividing a market that meaningfully changes the way that we would communicate to the people inside of that market, right? And so let's say one way you could segment a market, and importantly, there's infinite ways of segmenting it.
Mhm.
They're not mutually exclusive. And the way I think of it here is like, how do they think of themselves, right? If we were to remove ourselves, our product from the situation, and you're to look at this market, there's ways that they naturally cluster themselves,
Right.
right? You think of cold email people, right? Like
Right.
the people, those of us on this call are a specific subset of cold emailers, right? And so if you're like, hey, I saw you on the Smartlead Office Hours, that's going to mean a lot more than like, hey, I see you followed Gmail,
Yeah.
like on, you know what I mean, or whatever. Like no one cares. And so it's like the idea being these markets have ways that they divide themselves. They have sort of momentum within their sort of sphere, right? Like there's things that we all are talking about at different times that we're thinking about that exist without the vendor influence, right? Like this is like the market's kind of culture, you could think of it, right? And so the way they divide themselves, the way they behaviorally behave differently, like that's the truth, right? So from the outside, we might be like, oh, well, 50 to 100 head count is one segment, and then 100 to 500 is something, and then 500, and it's like, no, 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 like these people, no one's ever been in the company where they're like, oh my God, did you guys hear we hired 501 today? Like everything's different. That doesn't happen, right? That's not how people are thinking. But it might be like, hey, I saw you guys are hiring a head of go-to-market engineering, right? And that actually might have a lot of like psyche behind it that's different than just sort of this like tactical, situation, right?
Right.
It also might be true that you're like, hey, I noticed that no one on your sales team has any technical background whatsoever, and I'm guessing that you guys are terrible at RevOps and blah 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 blah, right? And those types of things are more conversational, right? They're actually like very like astute observations, right? Like if you can have the background of this team and you're like, oh yeah, it's a bunch of like, you know, yeah, just like if it's no one who has any sort of like startup experience and there's no one with RevOps and blah blah blah, you can start to sort of create these clusters, right? So market segment, right? Um, Next we think of it as like persona, right? And so the way we think of persona actually comes from Justin Michael. If you guys know, like Tech Powered Sales, great book in my opinion. And he calls it like the CEO of the problem, right? And I love this framing because it's like not thinking about necessarily the title, but like the person who owns X thing inside of this specific segment of this market,
Right.
right? And the reason I like that is because there's often really interesting target, again, like if you have an early stage company that doesn't have let's say they only have like a AE, like a founder and AE, they don't have a VP of sales, they don't have head of marketing, they don't have RevOps,
Right.
right? It might be that the AE is like the buyer of like cold outbound as a service, right? And you wouldn't traditionally think like account executive is a good buying title, but if it's a really small startup where the AE is the only person with any sort of go-to-market background and they're like a really sort of like mature hire in the position, totally legit. And in fact, reaching out to them and telling them like, hey, I know you're an account executive, but it seems like you're actually in charge of the whole go-to-market thing would actually be great, segmentation, right? Like that would probably meaningfully stand out to them. So it's that type of like thinking market, segment, persona. And then last is, we call it angle. The only sort of alpha on that is like people use pain point. I see it as like the market owns their pain points. Angles is sort of my framing on those pain points. And so we like to just like when we start working with a new client, we index like what are your, 80/20, right? Like real, 20% effort, 80% sort of like completion. But we'll quickly map out like what are the markets you work with? What are some of the ways that we think we could segment those markets that might be interesting in like positioning and messaging? What are the different personas in some of these different segments that we think that we're going to want to, be reaching out to? And then what are generally some of the different angles of what we could be saying, right? And when you map all that out on the front end, right? So like I'm an agency, right? For you agency guys out there, it's really helpful because you're going to show your client that if you think the first three things I run is comprehensive towards what could work, it's like you're just out of your mind. It's like there's a million different combinations, right? And sincerely, I've had it where like the 18th combination is the thing that starts to bang and everything else sucked, right? And so being able to help your like clients, and if you're in-house, same thing for like your managers or whoever, but showing like there's a lot of breadth to what could work. And if you really map this stuff out, my argument would be if you're really being empathetic to the market, it's kind of like we should assume that we're actually going to need to go a little bit further than the average person thinks if we really, really, really want to have potent campaigns,
100%.
right? So everything I've just said is very much so to call out like the own limitation of it. It's like it deifies potency, right? And so the framing on that as a business when I started out, right, which is like two years and like 8 months ago. Actually, I was looking on LinkedIn last night. So I started the agency, right? And basically I've been doing fractional VP of sales work where I've been working for Joey Gilkey, if you know him, and who I love. And basically, we had been doing this like 6 month fractional VP of sales in a box offer where we'd come in and we'd set up the tech stack and we map out their market and we'd help them do hiring. And then we'd like sit on top of it basically as a manager.
Right.
And what I was running into was like 100% make or break of it was like message market fit, right? It was like pipeline generation,
Mhm.
right? If these reps could come in the way and could sort of like day one generate pipeline, then the rest of the offer just like made sense because we were coaching full cycle, right? This like
Right.
full, so we were doing close. So it's like if there was no top of funnel, there was like two-thirds of the offer we just weren't even touching yet, right? And so it was extremely contingent on top of funnel outbound working, and we had a big breadth of who our customers were. And so some of those customers, they looked beautiful day one. Some of them were really, really challenging. And so I realized there's this opportunity. So I'd never in my life done a one-to-many campaign before, right? So when I started my business, I had not done like smart lead, the way what I call smart lead style campaigns. I'd been a guy in my own Google inbox looking up the cache and doing lots of one-on-one, but I knew what it looked like to write amazing cold emails from that perspective. And so I had this like strong anchor to like, if you had no limitations, what are the types of things you might say? And if you've written 1,000 great one-to-one emails, what you notice is like if you're using 80 words or less or whatever, and fifth grade or lower reading level and all these things, it starts to be like actually there's not that much, like there's some patterns to great pattern interrupty emails, right? Like
Right.
there's like a finite amount of things. And it's kind of like you can actually start to pattern like, oh, within the market, the people where this is true would be the thing I would one-to-one personalize off of, but maybe it applies to like 700 people in the market.
Yeah.
And if it applies to 700 of them, maybe I write to that whole thing. And in fact, so I started my business through the lens of, and this was before Clay was like doing what Clay is, right? And I basically was signing up for Smartlead. Jesse Olet was actually my inbox provider at the time, hilariously. He was hooking it up, right? I always have to shout out Jesse. He totally like helped us get started. Couldn't have done it without him. Him and Vibe off. And the ideal was like, I'm going to do message market fit testing by segmenting markets this way and then testing one-to-many messaging, going like, it's not necessarily like what the best ever cold emails could look like, but it's a way of testing sort of like the general resonance of different ideas within the market, right? Like, again, if we go market segment, persona, angle, we can start to figure out which angles to which personas of which segments of which markets are most resonant for you, customer, right? And the idea, like day one, we saw, so like when we start our agency, we'd reach out to 1,000 total contacts across 5 different sequences, split into 5 sets of 200. And all we were doing was potency testing, right? Like you're never going to hit, the net numbers that people, initially want. Over time, we've expanded upon that and yada yada. But the idea is just that like we very much so deified this like potency testing stuff. The way we did it was sort of through granularity, going like, how can we get more specific than what the pattern is out there?
Right.
And then when Clay came to the market, dude, it changed everything because what it meant was now instead of like what can Kellen sit there and write and do, we could start to program it into the tables, right? Now all of a sudden we can put our thought patterns against their data into these tables, and it really started to kind of change that we could actually like do this not just potency testing and hand it off to a team to go kind of actualize, but it's like we could do the actualized versions,
Mm.
right? Like we can go Claygent that, we can go write those emails now. And so anyways, I'll stop basically now and open it up for like Q&A and stuff. But I just want to share this because like the lens on it very much so is not what is Kellen's what we think is cool and what we think is important, but it's about understanding what is the market's natural way of existing. How do they see themselves? If we were to send them the average message and they ignore it, what are they, hearing and feeling in that? And then how can we sort of circumvent that pattern to ignore and instead, come out above it? So anyways, we can get into whatever. You guys can ask me anything about anything, agency stuff, strategy stuff. It looks like there's some in here already, so I'll take this first one.
Yep.
How do you come up with the ideas to segment the market? Usually clients aren't sure themselves. Is there a specific way you learn? Okay, super good question. Um, so I'm a big fan like what I use, like I'll use the term like lenses. And if you think of a lens as like an opinionated frame,
Hmm.
right? So if I put on like I have these red light blockers, right? So I put these on, everything becomes orange, right?
Right.
And orange isn't the truth, but it's like a current lens, right? And so when I do market analysis on the front end, to me, it's really useful to basically be able to like kind of compartmentalize or have these different frames of which I look at things, right? So the first one is like I have, like an intake form that asks my customer, but I don't say what are the markets, what are the segments, what are the personas, what are the angles. I ask them very specific questions that are like narrow and like kind of have friction to them that force them to answer differently than the format that I'm actually going to turn it into.
Right.
Right. I use this term healthy friction, where it's kind of like their impulse again is going to be like, oh, we work with Series A finance teams. And I'm like, I'm not going to let you answer Series A finance teams. Like that is not going to be so it might, and so I think like forcing them to talk about it differently and letting that be one lens, which is like, what is the way the customer sees it? Customer is really useful because they know their world really well. It's also really biased, like they're way in the weeds. And if they had your skill set, like, usually it's going to be that plus something is going to be what gets the best results, right? So I usually look one lens, how does the customer see the world? Number two, I'll usually just do my own research, kind of like imagine I'm like a cocky, like overly confident guy, and I'm gonna like pull up the website and I'm gonna, oh yeah, they do this and they help these guys, and like, and I'm just gonna come up with my own really fast, opinionated, like this is just my version. Then usually I'll go to like Reddit and some of the other places, and I kind of go like, when this market is complaining about things, like where do they go? And then like, what are they complaining about? Like, what do these people like hate?
Right.
Right? Because we usually have a lot of emotional charge in what we hate. And so learning like what is it that these people like knee jerk like like oh man, if you send this email, they're gonna go jump on Reddit and torch you, then I'm gonna go like use that in my email.
Right.
And I'm gonna be like, yo, Akash, when people get you wrong and they think blah, like we did it,
Right.
um, and so I'm gonna get those different lenses, right? So usually we'll kind of go like, what's the customer see? Like, what do we see? What does what are we seeing from the market? And then we'll present back to our customer like our mapping framework, right? And the idea is what we're presenting back is like our test plan, right? Kind of like, hey, based on what we heard from you and ourselves and this is what we want to run,
Mhm.
right? And the idea is like we only need to know what we're going to run next, right? Like we have all this theoretical mapping, but I
Right.
always tell people like, especially if we're talking about launching our first campaigns, like we're going to know so much more information 1 week into running whatever our first idea is
Right.
that it drives me crazy when we like delay those initial launches trying to be too accurate with our upfront stuff. Because
Makes
it's
sense.
kind of like no matter how much analysis we put into it, we're the truth is the market. Like we're trying to resonate with these people. They get to dictate what works. And so it's kind of silly to like try too hard up front, in my opinion, to get it right.
Makes a lot of sense.
Sick. Okay. Yeah. So hopefully that's, mostly nails it. Franco, creating SOP for service delivery, logic parts clear,
This
and
is
creating the strategy patterns. How
question.
do you, um, Franco, can you give me a little more on what you mean by the strategy patterns? Like, I think to me, the main strategy, the way I think of it, is usually that patterned thing is technically true. Like the guy that goes, we work with Series A finance teams. It's like they probably do, right? Like that literally probably is actually what their customer is. But it's just also probably 100% true that if you just built a list of Series A, finance teams, and you're like, hey, you're a Series A finance team. We help you, blah, blah, blah. Like, are you interested? They'd ignore it.
Right.
And so the idea is like we're not necessarily like resonance. Another like kind of concept is people make decisions emotionally that we justify logically. And so it's sort of like we want to like have this emotion spike and we want to disrupt the status quo of like doing nothing. And so to me, the strategy, it's why it's like, what is the pattern? And then what is a way that I could sort of not follow the pattern, be a little, one layer more specific. And then in my copy, I'll usually kind of just tell them the thing that I'm adding. Because if it's a good, like, if I'm segmenting on a good thing, I can just say what I'm segmenting by and it changes the meaning of the message. And the meaning is that it's more resonant because it's more specific to this audience in a way that they care about
Uh-huh.
versus a way that's like convenient for the vendor.
Absolutely. Because I think at this point, we all have this common pattern, less than 80 words, or talk about the user, or keep it like this, etc. We don't think about these kind of stuff, right? So this opens a new room as to how you need to think when you write your copies.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I think like okay, so that's actually some okay, so that's good frame, that's helpful. So some of my mental frameworks, I think of like a graph that would be conversational buy-in is like the vertical axis, and then the
Right.
horizontal is like conversational advancement,
Right.
right? And so my thinking here is that basically my argument would be like you can't advance a conversation that someone's not bought into, right? So if you're like cold calling and they're trying to pull off, if you're trying to sort of like move the ball forward as your means of getting buy-in, it won't work. And so in email, it's like the number one thing that's going to happen is they're going to ignore it, right? And so the basically our number one goal is disrupt status quo, which isn't about moving our ball forward. It's actually about sort of like poking at something that might be true for them. I'll
Right.
pull up. I'll pull this up. This is from Chet Holmes. People have spent time with me are probably making fun of me in the comments because I show this thing off so freaking much. But like this, I love it because let's see, where's the little draw tool? Is it? Okay. Well, anyways, so what's useful about this is in theory, this is like our markets, right? Any sort of market we're targeting, 3% are buying now for that sort of category. Let's say like cold email sending tools. 7% of the market is like open to buying, which you could think of as they consciously know they have the problem and they're sort of like open to the idea that maybe we should do something about it,
Right.
right? Meaning there's momentum behind them, right? And then 30% are not thinking about it. And so these people are sort of like bang neutral in the middle. The
Right.
next third are don't think they're interested, so they have like negative momentum a little bit. And then the next third, no, they're not interested. Really strong negative momentum, right? And so basically, average outbound, right? Average cold email, all you're ever going to do is compete for this top 10% of the market, which is people that are literally already thinking about like wanting to buy a cold email tool. And your messaging to these people, it like matters a lot less what you actually say as long as they know you do cold email stuff because
Right.
they already want that. And so it's basically like, oh my gosh, yeah, we're kind of these are like those people that reply and they're like, oh yeah, we are trying to find a cold email tool. Like, could you meet next week? And you're kind of like, oh my gosh, this is so. Now the problem with that is you're relatively a commodity to them, right? And a lot of the times these people are kind of like dysfunctional, not choosers, right? Like you might be dealing with people who are sort of perennially up here.
Right.
What, in my opinion, elite outbound does is it unlocks four times the market by also resonating with the not thinking about people, right? And so my thinking on when we're segmenting the market is we're kind of looking for like what are ways that we can divide things so that if we were to make an argument to this audience about why they should be doing our thing that they're not currently thinking about, it might perk their interest, right? And this is sort of, I kind of write to this person. So I don't write to people who already don't like it. I don't write to people necessarily who have already decided I have a problem and I'm looking for it, but I'm actually trying to disrupt the status quo and get them to kind of go like, oh, actually, I shouldn't be sitting here doing nothing, right? And again, that doesn't usually focus on me, my product, what I do. It actually focuses on them, their situational factors, and usually like opportunity costs that they're not chasing or something like that.
Right. Interesting. And that segment is actually the real cold segment, right? Because in the first 10%, there's some sort of intent in some or the other way. This is the actual cold. Uh,
Yes,
case.
yes, and it looks totally different to talk to them, right? Like the analogy I give people is like imagine like trying to sell a bottle of water for like $100,
Right.
right? And so like people who are buying now or open to buying are like at the end of a marathon and they're like running and you're like, hey, I have, and they're like, yes, I want it. And you're like, it's 100, and like I don't care. And like, and the point is you're not doing anything to sell that. Like they want that. You're
True.
just in their way. You know what I mean? It's like the argument that it's like sure you got the product there, right? Placement's a piece of the four Ps or whatever, but like they're much less elastic to you. On the flip side, if you go up to someone and you're like, "Hey, I have this bottle of water. It's $100. Do you want it?" And like, "No." And you're like, "Okay. Do you know how long it is until the next gas station?" And you're like, "No." And you're like, "All right, good luck." And like, "What do you mean?" And then you're like, it's gonna be like 5 days until you're gonna have another chance to buy liquid. Hopefully, you have like a bunch of gallons with you because it's a hot desert between now and then, right? And then that person, right, they weren't aware. Now they're aware, they're going to be interested, right? And so, like, amazing outbound is finding those people who are walking through the desert, don't know they're there, and you're like, yo, you are in a bad situation if you don't step up here and do something about it, right?
100%.
Because then all they're doing is going like, oh, I'm interested in learning what you do, and that's what the call is. That's it, right? We don't sell them in this email. So, anyways, hopefully it's helpful.
Absolutely. And picking a couple of ones from the chat, Kellen, one from Matish Gupta. What if you have already sent various email sequences based on different personalized strategies and still the responses are limited? What would be the next best approach?
Yeah. Okay. Good question. A few things, right? So one is I always tell people like each market, in my opinion, like whether this is technically exactly true or not, but like there's sort of like a market potential, right? Like my belief is not that you can forcefully segment every market in a way that you can make cold email bang for what you do.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like I just don't believe that. And so I think sometimes you could sell something that the market doesn't care about. Like it could be that your market just has factors that make them less elastic to your messaging for various reasons, right? And so um I think like, so on one hand, I'm always asking myself, like, basically, should I quit and give up? And not like in a defeatist way, but just like in an honest way. Like, has the market's response told me they don't care? Right? Like, especially if this is a startup company, it's not like 100% of startups IPO, right? Lots of these companies fail. And so my opinion is like, when we shorten timelines, we're either more quickly finding winners or we're more quickly like disqualifying this and going like, hey, maybe this, we tried a bunch of different stuff, right? Um, that being said, like I'm usually trying to kind of segment off of static things, usually on the front end, because I think that's more, it's like better, right? It's more convenient if like we can find ways of sort of dividing the market that isn't like going to be really, really small percentages. But if I'm like really having a hard time, I think there's a bunch of things like new hires and some of that type of stuff that's kind of like low hanging fruit. And I would maybe try to position, like you can back off of like how much of like a sales cold email this is and more of like, hey, Kellen, I'm looking at, like head of outbounds who have just started and been getting absolutely torched in my cold emails. Like, would you be willing to help me out just a tiny bit? Like, I would have imagined you guys care a ton about this, but I think I'm only getting spam blocked. Like, where am I off or something like that? Like, I'll buy you, I'll buy one of your reps, Josh Braun sales training or something. But like, the point is like, I would deify resonance. Like if you're trying to compete and it's not working, I would be like, all right, I'm not even going to try to compete. And I would just try to resonate. And I
Right.
would just try to get responsiveness. And then I would try to kind of pull that back into competing if you can.
Makes sense. And Atish, I hope you got your answer for that. And the next question, before I go there, I had one very important announcement to make, ladies and gentlemen. So Smartlead is out with pre-warmed mailboxes. Yes, you heard me right. Pre-warmed mailboxes are out. You don't have to wait for 14 days, etc. You have mailboxes that are ready to fire. So we have both Gmail and Outlook pre-warmed mailboxes. You get them from Zapmail through Smart Senders. So if you haven't check them out, and they're all yours to purchase. But from the next question, right? It's from Fahad. How do you do deep level research slash insights? Like the examples you gave, how do you do if the company sales team is not aware of specific tool slash stack?
Okay, cool question. Yeah, we just make it up. No, no, no. So basically, okay, so the way I do this is I first map out like my strategic thinking, right? And the way I would map this out is actually free of like how I'm gonna actually figure this out, right? I would deify like clean thinking. So it's like, okay, how would I divide the market? How would I then I ask myself, like, how can I kind of proxy this? And importantly, you don't have to be perfect, right? So one of Will Allred from Lavender,
Lavender.
one of like their OG data points that I just love is that like uncertainty in emails actually increases resonance,
Right.
right? So cold emails will hit better when you use uncertainty in your language. So when people say, Kellen, I saw you have blah, 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 that's going to work worse than saying, Kellen, it seems like you have blah, 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 right? And so the
Yeah.
idea here is when you use uncertainty language, you kind of open up people's like willingness to like correct you or like desire to correct as well. And you're kind of like admitting up front, like instead of being like, I'm cocky and you're like, oh, you idiot, and then, delete, you're kind of like, oh, I'm just like this little, whatever. And so, anyways, using uncertainty. So it's like now you have these two levers where you're like, okay, there's this idea that I need to come up with a proxy for how I can sort of make this claim. The more accurate I know my data point is, right? So let's say that my data point is like, do they have a head of go-to-market,
Mhm.
right? Then I might be pretty confident. And so I could be like, I would get it by like finding the person.
Right.
But let's say that I'm trying to do it by like something much more abstract. Like, do I think they have like a modern GTM stack, right?
Right.
Like, so modern GTM stack. So if my idea is like, okay, I think that this audience is gonna care about this concept, this idea of modern GTM stack, and that like some people go, oh, you have the modern stack, and so here's how Smartlead helps you. And then other people go, oh my gosh, you're behind the times. You need to get into Smartlead, right? So
Right.
it's like same product, two different arguments, right? If the important thing is that I can make this argument of basically like land this idea of like you're modern so that basically so they do that. So they nod. That's all you're really trying to do, right? Is like get them
Right.
to like own this identity of like, yes, that's me to read the next beat. So you just so it's basically like don't overplay what you have. You kind of have to know like, do I really strongly have this? Do I kind of have this? Again, the atmospheric one, I might just look at like maybe I say like maybe I just tell them like I think you're in like a modern day tech stack or whatever, and then I add a PS line and I go like PS figured you guys are modern because I saw common room in your AE hiring description, right? Something like that. And so I'm
Right.
just giving like anything because the point is they're not looking at like all of the math of what went into me pegging them as like kind of modern.
Mhm.
And the threat is me being like, you're a modern day tech stack, and then like deeply anti-resonating with that. So I just
Right.
need to make sure that I give enough that it's like, oh, okay, I see how you could say that. Because you'll still plenty often get people who are like, oh, we're actually kind of behind the times, but this is timely because, well, so it's like it's not like you get your kind of upfront hypothesis wrong in the value prop in like anti-lands.
Mhm.
It's just that the basis of an argument looking like that is almost like it's like cleaner math. And so even if the person isn't perfectly fitting in it themselves, sometimes they'll kind of look at the work you're putting in and be like, oh, okay, this checks out and be resonant respondent. And if we're just doing kind of like message market fit testing, I usually won't necessarily like actualize every campaign because usually there might be a version of a campaign that's like, well, I could spend 20 hours and I could do like this insane workflow and it might be like 99% accurate, or I could spend 2 hours and it could be 87% accurate. And if I can do the 2 hour thing to test it, usually that's going to like get you further along testing imperfect things and sort of like iterating through that versus spending too much time up front trying to be too perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this session is going to be named Better Ways to Think with Kellen Casebeer.
Thank you, thank
That's
you.
good.
That's
But
kind.
next up is from Daim Kellen. So, if you're working with a really small TAM, say about 10K or less, how do you find a message market fit without exhausting your entire TAM? And if you do use your entire TAM for texting in such a case, how do you then scale up what worked? Because you've already sent email sequences to the TAM now.
Yeah, like I mean, like 10K, you could like I would default to either like three lists of 3,000-ish or two lists of 5,000 and just like cycling through them basically. Um, I really like, the conversation to me becomes one with the client. And it's basically like there's two concepts. There's message market fit, which is potency,
Right,
right? Meaning per thousand people you enroll, how many are gonna book, let's say.
right,
And then on the other end, you have net total meetings, right? So you might, if I can send, so like what I would generally try to do with small TAM is get the argument like, hey, if you guys are okay being a little patient on net total number, you can test against populations of 300 contacts. You know what I mean? Like just do really, 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 really small populations and do like really small, tight testing. And you could kind of like get, representative samples before scaling it up. But like that's what my business did day one when we started. And like I joked that like we get fired by people we did amazing work for because you could be getting 8 meetings out of 1,000 people enrolled
right,
and they're like, hey, we need 20, you're out of here, right? And so eventually we started to like open that up a little bit. But like we regularly, we like our default would be like 3,500-ish contacts split
right,
between 5 different campaigns
right.
at a time, so 10K would be no problem.
Got it. Awesome. Next question is from Saksham. Have you run any campaigns for these demand capture offers like web design, cybersecurity, business loans, and paid ads? Any advices?
Volume, baby. Yeah, yeah. We have a we have a client that we send like 800,000 for a month or something
Ah,
like that.
right.
Yeah, yeah, and they're just like a loan. Yeah, it's like a
Ah,
loan off. And it's just we just cook volume. We've tried so many cute things.
right,
And again, that's a really good example of like not that elastic, right? Like there's just not gonna be like there's not something any of you guys could do that will land and message in my inbox and make me take one of these loans right now. You know what I mean? It's like
right.
just not gonna. And so yeah, yeah, definitely have just I just say pump
From
volume and like do a multi-channel.
Got it. Makes sense. And the next question is quite a big one, which is when segmenting, how do you hypothesize stuff? Is it completely arbitrary? I don't think it is. Since you're not actually there in the market, how do you get into their world, especially when it's something completely new for you? How much time does it take for you to reach a point where you think, okay, I now know enough about this market and the people in it to hypothesize something about them?
I never stop hypothesizing. It's a forever exercise. So like the way I would generally look at it is like if I'm going 0 to 1 message market fit, right? I'd probably do like 5 campaigns at a time with kind of like 20% allocation each,
Right.
right? Because there is no best.
Mhm.
As soon as I have like relative best, I'd be doing something like 70% volume into like split testing a very similar campaign that I know works, 70% volume, like an A and a B.
Right.
And then I take like the remaining 30 and I do like 10, 10, and 10 of just like net new wild idea testing, right? So that's like the way that I would kind of like structurally forever test. Now, I would actually say like it is pretty arbitrary segmentation on the front end. It's literally an advantage of my business, I think. Like one of the thing, not that this doesn't apply to like lots of people, but like one of the things we talk about with prospects is like we are not like a totally productized business. Like we there's not an automation that takes the client intake form and spits through this and spits out a mark. Now, nope, not at all. It's like we look at their answers and we thoughtfully ponder their answers and we seriously, we go on the Reddits and like we go. So it's like, I think like and again, part of it's kind of like wiping your mind clear and just taking in the way the customer talks about things, what's on the web pages and stuff. And that gives you a lens. The other lens that, and you're right, it isn't arbitrary, so to speak, is like when you've worked with, I don't know, well over 100 by now, right? So it's like well over 100 companies who have gone through the exercise of basically like we're terrible at outbound and we want to make it work for us. There's like it's not like there's there kind of like are some like patterns set, I guess. You know what I mean? And it's not like it's a pattern that I can necessarily codify. And I wouldn't really, again, I wouldn't try to follow like an SOP checklist to get to that.
Mhm.
The thing I would sincerely recommend is practicing like submersing into things and sort of free thinking through them. Also I like this book Anti-Fragile a lot, right? Like I gotta say this. And so like one of the ideas would be like customers have an opinion. I'm gonna like kind of quickly come up with an opinion and I'm gonna go like speak it to my customer and we're gonna like argue. You know what I mean? Like we're gonna like both argue, like we're not gonna like fight, but we are going to, I will unapologetically be like, Akash, your intake form, you said this. By my research, I would have guessed this. Like help me
Right.
understand, right? And that's where the good stuff comes from
100%.
because it's like where are people making presumptive moves? Where again, like where is the pattern? Like it's more important to understand what is the pattern of what the average SDR that hits up these people is doing than everything about their world, right? It's like high empathy to be like, I can't really understand them, but I can understand what's annoying to them because, again, I know what the junior people that like are kind of like skimming, what they're supposed to be doing are doing. That's how I mostly think about it. Figure out the pattern. That's, I think, like number one.
Absolutely. Makes a lot of sense. And next question is from Firim. What's your favorite outbound email? And can you work backwards on how your framework allowed you to come up with it?
Good question. I don't like, I don't think like, like, okay, so I mean, this is gonna be like so unappealing. I feel like, bro, I'm sorry. Like, you deserve a better answer. But no. So the way I think of this, like, very abstractly, is like the default cold email like logic pattern that we're basically trying to deliver is like you are at point A, and they go, uh-huh, and then we go, that means X, and they're like, uh-huh, and then we're like, we can help you get to point B
Mhm.
where point B is something that they care about. And then usually, and then like a soft CTA basically. And usually in that, we also have to sort of insert like what we like to my framework is kind of like speak to where their hesitancy is. Right. So if it's kind of like if I know the pattern is like, hey, you're at point A and you want to be at point B, don't you? We can help you get there. Then it's like, okay, so then what's the pattern interrupt going to be like? Hey, you're at point B, but everyone's promising point B, or you're at point A. I know you want to be at point B, but you believe like thing C is in the way. Do you think, right? And I think that like that framework, because then it's like, okay, so what's the thing in the way? Like what is the because again, it's usually true that like they work with the Series A finance team or whatever. So it's like the pattern is usually rooted in kind of like like if you were to average out, this is another way I actually think of it, is like people average out the market and then they average out their value props to them, but people don't come to you for all of your reasons. They come to you for one reason, right? Like something happened to them that they cared about. You do something that resolves the thing they care about. They don't care that you do 100 things. They care about you like eclipsing the thing they care about. And so it's kind of like a lot of the pattern is like average market, average value prop. Do you want to learn more? And I would just be like, okay, try to be like, hyper specific market, specific value prop to that market, which should, and when you do that, you kind of like, I don't flex it as hard too, right?
Right.
Some of the like current like stuff would be like, hey, name, I saw you thing, right? And like the focus is on this like personalization, right? Like, hey, I saw you thing, and it's like filled in. I like to try to make it more presumptive. So it's like Akash, like, like modern GTM teams often run into and so that by the end of it is actually my argument
Right.
and the like personalization is this like subtle early thing where it's almost like they're kind of like, wait, what the hell? Like, hold on, did he, so it's not so like, look at me, I personalized, but it's a little bit more like I'm making this cool argument and it happens to subtly have some of this stuff. So, anyways, hopefully that's helpful for
Yep.
everyone.
Absolutely. And the next question is from Amar. Do you think over segmentation can hurt creativity by making messages too narrow, or is hyper personalization always a win?
Oh yeah, no, dude. Yes. Here's my argument, hot take, is like if you can only resonate in one-to-one emails, you're not a good creative writer. Like if you like it requires more creativity to figure out the message that hits to like 100 people versus just one, is my argument. Um, and I see it as a spectrum, right? And so the spectrum is one to one. Like I each person gets a message that I researched only them to write. And then over here is one to everyone. And like somewhere in the middle is usually the best, right? So yeah, 100%. I definitely don't, it's like not a exercise in like needlessly getting narrow because it's about like resonance. It's like, what do these people care about? And if they, it might be that people get too narrow with them. And you're like, hey, everyone's always trying to pretend that it's different whether you do this, this, or this, but everyone knows that every blah, blah, blah mostly cares about this, right? You're like, yes,
Absolutely.
finally, someone, that type of stuff.
Understood. Awesome. Next question is from Harshita. If you have already targeted your ICP and now you would like to retarget them again for a different use case of your company, how would you do that?
Smart lead, baby. Hit send. Like, what do you mean? No, yeah, no problem. Most emails don't get seen. Most don't get opened or read or seen. So most don't even get like at all comprehended. Like literally there's zero impression that it happened. The next biggest bucket is like they saw it, they kind of like glanced at it and didn't care and moved on, meaning there's no permanent impression. There is a tiny, tiny, minuscule threat that it's just like almost never gonna happen, especially if it's more than like 2 weeks apart. So I would just say like don't worry about it. I generally try to have like 3 or 2 cohorts of the TAM if I'm like trying to like aggressively TAM cycle.
Right.
So you could get even narrower than that if you need to, but yeah, good question.
Awesome. Next question is from Bhushan. Historically, which messaging have you seen work for e-com marketing niche? The offer is FB ads plus Google ads plus creatives. I'm trying free creative, but all I get many replies but no meetings. You think volume is the only way? Yes, great session.
Yeah, good question. Thank you, first of all. Yeah, e-com's tough, man. E-com's like not my favorite necessarily, like just personally. Um, yeah, like it's interesting. I think offers is a thing that I see a lot of like focus on in e-com. Like I think the e-com world is kind of like very offery. I think it's tough because they're very savvy. It's very like networky, very like everyone's homies with each other, and so it's harder a little bit to um so I actually definitely wouldn't think volume is the only way. I think also like email can be, if you can hit multi-channel for that audience, like sometimes you'll be like, man, I really thought this email thing was going to work. It doesn't work. And you just call them and you say exactly that and it just rips. Right. And so specifically when we're testing messaging in email, you're testing email messaging, right? And it's really important to remember that because again, you might have like customers done a bunch of inbound stuff, so they know what works for inbound, and they've optimized the website, so they know what works there. And channel partner guy like knows what like the channel partners care about. But when you're doing the cold email, it's a new thing.
Got it. Next interesting question. You mentioned anti-fragile. What are your favorite books slash people that have shaped your beliefs, perspectives in marketing and
Yeah.
sales?
Okay, so I'll I'll give you like my vanilla answer first. The vanilla answer would be like Josh Braun, heavily influenced for sure. So Josh Braun is like an OG, OG, OG. Will Allred, he laughs. He always says I make him sound like an old head, but he was putting stuff out when I was like a rep learning. So, so I think Will Allred. Uh, I really um, I like Justin Michael a lot. Like when I started my agency, I read Tech Powered Sales like a bunch of times back to back to back, like sort of like mimetically, and it was pretty good. Now, so those would be kind of, and then I think like my biggest influence, honestly, is just like being a practitioner. And what I mean by that is like I don't believe that like the information, like the truth is not held within the books. The truth isn't what Kellen says. Like the truth is what works. It's like what happens. And the things that work best right this second are not what's going to be working best 2 years from now, right? For sure, right? I don't,
Absolutely.
and somewhere, and there's probably gonna be a few cycles in that timeline, right? And the people that are gonna know the things that work the best in the cycle 2 years from now, it's not in a book back there. It's like people doing things and figuring stuff out. And sincerely, I have gained a lot in my career and in my agency especially by basically not putting very much emphasis on trying to sort of learn via like authoritative sources, but actually just like thinking a lot and like asking questions and doing stuff. And when you learn to sort of like have a question and like test and validate things yourself and have like a velocity to that, like I can do that just faster than I can read a book also, I guess. Um, but anyways, I think it's like really empowering, and freeing. And I think it's like I see a lot of people who are like really, really good where I respect their skill set so much. And they're like asking me like where they can learn things. I'm like, stop trying to learn things. Just go do. Like go apply your skill set and like, tell me if after, 90 days of just taking what you have and do it, if you feel like you've become disadvantaged in your knowledge attainment.
Awesome. And especially for a landscape like this, Glenn, because in the last couple of years, you would have seen how things changing, right? Because we say something and that's not the thing. You try out new
Yeah.
things, something new is working for you. So absolutely, lovely answer. And the next big question for you, how do you engineer message market fit for software development agencies when the category has a long history of weak, low quality leads? The core issue is that their services are broad, their offers are undefined, and their TAM can't be narrowed to one meaningful segment. I want to understand how you create a high ROI messaging strategy in a vertical where the ICP is fragmented, the problems vary industry by industry, and the value props shift depending on the buyer's context.
It's like a layup. No. Well, it's like it's both because like I'll give you the framework. Now, this is like a really hard one. Honestly, the cheat code is if your client does COBOL programming, COBOL, it's like this old mainframe programming language, and like no one, like basically the people that know it all think that they're like, like not gonna be around that much longer. And so it's super funny because like if you actually find people who hiring programmers that list COBOL, and if your subject line is just like hiring COBOL programmers and you're like, hey, I saw you're hiring COBOL, like you're gonna have a hell of a time finding that and then make some sort of argument, that will literally work. But it's a very, 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 very small subset of people that have COBOL programmers. Now, the framework I would do, right, and you're exactly right. It's like it's fragmented, it's all over the place. So I would literally just map out high level, what are some of the markets you work with? And then what are some of the ways you would divide those markets that meaningfully change how you talk to them, right? An example might be you're like, well, we could work with early stage software companies, divide them by the programming languages they use. Like you can know exactly what the language is, right? You can know, the application of that language, right? Like what is the, and I would just work on being more specific, right? Now this is like a relatively low elasticity offer, but like your email should basically be like, hey, Nam, I saw that you guys hire programmers who know blank. I'm guessing it's because, companies like feature is built on, like something related to that language, right? Like their databases or whatever. And then if you're like, it doesn't look like you're currently hiring, but wouldn't be surprised if you have like a backlog of tasks that you could use some support on. Like, would you be open to us letting someone spend a day and a half working with you to see if it's worth potentially, buying their time into the future, something like that,
Right.
right? That's sort of like the idea of like the level of specificity I would guess to have, right? It might be things like turnover too, right? Like maybe my theory is like, oh, I'll look at people who turn people over quickly, and I might be like, hey, I saw that you've had to let go like three devs within, their first 60 days in the last couple months. Uh, would it be useful to like have an agency relationship that, managing this sort of thing versus like, something like that.
Right. Makes sense. And Marek has just started on COBOL.
Yeah.
Well, I think the last question for the session we have, Kellen, is how do you explain and emphasize the difference to your clients when there's a difference in lead quality that are generated with cold email in comparison to inbound leads that are already ready to buy and they're already used to working with?
Okay. Yeah. This is a good one, actually. I haven't for some reason this hasn't come up to me very much recently, but what I used to say is like revenue channels don't actually compete necessarily, right? So like the people coming inbound and the people coming out that you're like hitting up outbound, they're not the same people. And so I'd ask this person, like, is the question you only are allowed to have one of them, you know, is the question. Like, you feel like the outbound thing is independently like not profitable enough? Is it that you're just want to try to, you know, like basically I would sort of try to force them to sort of like qualify where they're coming at it from, because I get it. Like, they're trying to go like, hey, how, you know, sell better, right? Like, they're earlier in their buying motion if you're doing this well. And so it is going to be a different conversation, right? Now, I think the math on this is that like deal cycles are actually, I think, shorter with cold outbound, right? Because you kind of like can set your own like proprietary frame to this.
Right.
So people who are used to selling inbound, it's like you're kind of like order taking against their demand, and you're competing against their like frame on like, okay, well, we looked at these three people, you know, could you do this or could blah blah blah. With outbound, if these people weren't thinking about it yet, they're talking to us, right? And if you're like, so why'd you book the meeting? They're like, I don't know, you sent me this email, right? And so you might then end up sitting down and being like, ending up having to educate them a little bit through the process of like, you know, people like you are here, you know, sometimes people are looking to do this, sometimes people like this. And part of, you know, I frequently have conversations that basically are like, hey, are you looking to add a revenue channel? Because if it's not better than your other one day one, it's going to be like a huge mistake, or is there some sort of strategic implication, right? Because again, these people, these inbounds, they might love to talk about their sales cycle. And then you're like, sick. Like, how much does your inbound funnel cost? They're like, oh, we spent 300 grand a month on ads. And you're like, okay. So like, it's great that these close twice as easily or whatever, but if you're giving me, you know, 5 grand a month or, you know, so anyways, I just think it's like, it's kind of like a broader strategic discussion. Generally, I would be pointing them at either like, hey, is this, you know, if it's R&D, like if it's strategic R&D, we're not just talking like linear cash flow, right? We're like investing in a strategic move, where sometimes people are really transactional. Like, I definitely have customers that are like, yeah, no, like if this doesn't work within 90 days, you know, at a lower cost per lead than these other three channels that we run, we're just going to fire you. And like that's fine. That, you know,
Right.
that's the mission. So yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much, Kellen. Thank you so much for the session. It's always been a candid, conversational, interesting, a different perspective on log session with you, Kellen. Looking forward to having you back, and thank you so much for coming today. And thank you all, folks, for taking the time for the session. Kellen, any final words before we part?
No, just thank you guys so much. This is always so fun. I would say anyone, first of all, I just got to shout out Merrick, who started on COBOL. That's awesome. You're definitely probably the only person in here where that's true. But yeah, anything, like anytime I can help any of you guys, hit me up anywhere. Like, more than happy. I love doing this. You know, again, I always just tell people like Smartlead day one for us. It's like we went out in the world. We were not doing this one to many stuff. Smartlead was there for us. It's been our absolute staple ever, you know, the entire time. And so I just love to get to like participate in this community. You know, it's done so much for me that like it's just an honor.
Absolutely, Kellen. Thank you so much. And likewise, and as you all know, again, the pre-warmed mailboxes are out. This is for my marketing team. I have to do it twice. So the pre-warmed mailboxes are out. Check it out, guys. It's for Outlook, it's for Gmail, ready to fire. So you must have it on your Smartlead website. And thank you all for taking the time. Thank you so much, Kellen. Looking forward to see you on the one more session. And like I always say, three consistent things in life: death, taxes, and office hours every Thursday. See you all on the next one. Cheers. Bye, folks.
Thank you.